Serving on the board of trustees are former US Vice President and climate change guru Al Gore, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, the President of the European Central Bank Christine Lagarde, the Director of CERN Fabiola Gianotti, the Queen of Jordan, the Director of the International Committee of the Red Cross Peter Maurer, and many other politicians and CEOs of the world's most influential companies. According to the WEF's official website, their annual membership fee ranges between 53,000 and 530,000 euros. But according to the WEF's year reports, around 71% of their total budget comes from its partners, who in this way pay for the membership of young politicians who cannot afford their own fee. Wikipedia reports the following. According to critics, the WEF is a business forum where the wealthiest companies can negotiate deals with other companies or with politicians. The purpose of the WEF for many of the participants would be personal gain instead of solving global problems. I don't like to make assumptions, but would there be so many problems on Earth if the key industry leaders, bankers and politicians since 1971 had gathered annually to solve our world's problems? Is it not strange that the world's leading environmental organizations have been meeting for 50 years with the CEOs of the most heavily polluting corporations while things just keep getting worse for our natural world? That these critics of the WEF are right soon becomes clear when we look at who the most important partners are that account for almost 71% of the WEF's budget. There are BlackRock, the Open Society Foundations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and many other large corporations of whom Vanguard and BlackRock own the shares directly or indirectly. The president and founder of the WEF is Klaus Schwab, a German professor and businessman. In his book, The Great Reset, he describes in detail the plans of his organization. The coronavirus, according to him, is the excellent opportunity to literally reset our society in every regard. He calls this Build Back Better, and this slogan seems to be the motto of all globalist politicians in the world.
And it's now a historical moment, a crucial moment to rebuild the future, to reset our policies.
And of course, we also want to work together on building back better.
You know, I said we're going to build back and we're going to build back better.
It's certainly a major crisis, but it also offers us a unique opportunity.
We must use this historical opportunity.
Together we can turn a crisis into an opportunity.
But this global pandemic has also created an opportunity to build back better.
To build back better later.
But also to build back better.
To build back a better world.
To build back better.
We can't just build back, we got to build back better.
And achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
And climate action is an essential part of that.
According to Schwab, our old society should be exchanged for a new one, in which countries give up their sovereignty to an all-encompassing world government, in which people own nothing but work for the state, in exchange for their housing, healthcare, and all their other basic needs. All of this is necessary, according to the WEF, because our modern consumer society, which the elite themselves imposed on us, can't keep going as it is. It's no longer sustainable. Schwab says in his book that we will never return to the old normal. And the WEF published a video that makes it clear that in 2030 we will own nothing, but we will be happy. You've probably heard some talk about the New World Order. The media wants us to believe that this is a topic for conspiracy theorists, although it has been talked about for generations by presidents such as George Bush Sr., Nelson Mandela, and Bill Clinton.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
That the affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
But also by the world's most famous philanthropists such as Cecil Rhodes, David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, and even George Soros.
I think you need a new world order, that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in, they have to own it.
These important figures, who apart from Mandela, were all among the top of the elite when they were still alive, are not the only ones who dream about an all-powerful world government. In 2015, the UN presented its controversial Agenda 2030, which is almost identical to Klaus Schwab's Great Reset. In their own words, the UN, like Schwab, wants to ensure that by 2030, poverty, hunger, environmental pollution, and disease no longer exist on Earth. It sounds like a sympathetic plan, until you read the fine print. You see, the idea is that Agenda 2030 is going to be paid for by us, the citizens. And just as it is currently required of us that we give up our basic rights for the sake of public health, we will be demanded to give up our wealth in favor of poverty reduction. These are not conspiracy theories. You can read this for yourself on their official website. In short, it boils down to this. The UN wants to take the tax money from all Western countries and give it to the mega corporations of the elite, who will be contracted to rebuild society. Globally, a completely new infrastructure is needed, because fossil fuels must be made a thing of the past, according to the UN. For this immense project, a world government is needed, says the UN. And the same UN takes it upon herself to be this global government. Just like Schwab, the UN also believes that a pandemic is the perfect opportunity to accelerate the implementation of Agenda 2030. It is worrisome that the WEF and the UN openly admit that they consider pandemics and other disasters as an opportunity to transform society, especially since we have seen that the elite have all the resources at their disposal to make us believe that there is a pandemic, and even to create one. So we certainly should not take these things lightly, and we should examine them carefully. And when we do that, we come across things that are even more troubling. On Friday, October 18, 2019, months before the pandemic was declared, a meeting was held at the Pierre Hotel in New York City for a select group of about 130 very important guests, including politicians and the world's most respected medics and pharmacists. The purpose of the meeting was to simulate the possible scenarios in the event of a global pandemic. This could be a coincidence, you might say. For this simulation, however, a coronavirus was used as an example. The simulation covered in detail how the coronavirus would develop and how they could only control this through the intensive collaboration of entire industries, governments, and government agencies. Once again, a new world order to save us from destruction. Does it surprise you when I tell you that this meeting, called Event 201, was organized by none other than the World Economic Forum, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Johns Hopkins Institute? This is not a conspiracy theory. Check the official website of Event 201 for yourself. Perhaps at this point, it will no longer surprise you that the German Robert Koch Institute, which like every national health institute in the world is closely linked to the WHO, which is funded by Bill Gates, created a similar simulation in 2012. As was the case during Event 201, the simulation assumed the coronavirus. This simulation assumed that in a Southeast Asian food market, a coronavirus would spread from animal to human. How coincidental, isn't it? In this simulation, it takes several weeks for the authorities to identify the virus, allowing it to spread worldwide. The simulation is made of the consecutive 3 years, in which there are lockdowns and economies are destroyed. But also the impact on society is simulated in all aspects, even the protests. I won't tire you with the details. In fact, you can download this analysis for yourself from the website of the German government. The last thing I want to show is an excerpt from a lecture that Belgian top virologist Mark van Ranst gave on January 22, 2019 at the Chatham House, a major non-profit organization in London, where important world leaders meet to discuss global issues. Winners of the Chatham House Prize include Hillary Clinton, Melinda Gates, and John Kerry. What Van Ranst is discussing is simply shocking. Van Ranst in fact explains how he has fooled the entire Belgian population during the swine flu through fear-mongering, out-of-context mortality rates, and media manipulation. He laughingly explains how he managed to impose the vaccine for the swine flu on the frightened Belgian population, a vaccine produced by the pharmaceutical companies he worked for.
Thank you very much, Ab. Thanks for the invitation. And I was asked to tell you about my experiences being the crisis manager, the flu commissioner for Belgium, and highlighting the communication. And then you have one opportunity to do it right. I mean, day one is so important. In day one, you start your communication with the press, with the people, and you have to do it right. I mean, you have to go for one voice, one message. In Belgium, they chose to appoint a non-politician to do that. I mean, I have no party affiliations, and that makes things a little bit, at that time at least, a little bit easier, because you're not attacked politically, majority, minority. That doesn't come into play, and that was a huge advantage. The second advantage is that you can play in Brussels the complete naive guy and get a lot more done than you would otherwise be able to do. You have to be omnipresent that first day or the first days, so that you attract the media attention. You make an agreement with them that you will tell them all, and if they call, you will pick up the phone. When you do that, then you can profit from these early days to get complete carpet coverage of the field, and they're not going to search for alternative voices there. And if you do that, that makes things a lot easier. These first weeks, that's easy street. When you have no opposition and everybody needs news and they can come to you for news, you can bring quite a lot of neutral information, and it is picked up, and it is well, the news is brought the way you bring it, and that is you can only do that in the first couple of weeks or months. And then you have to say, okay, well, we will have H1N1 deaths. Of course, that would be unavoidable. I used there Sir Donaldson's quote, where he said that in the UK, by the peak of the epidemic, 40 people would die per day at the end of the summer. So 62 at that time million people in the UK, 40 deaths a day. I worked it out for Belgium. That would be 7 deaths a day at the peak of the epidemic. I used that in the media. 7 Belgian flu deaths per day at the peak of the epidemic would be realistic. That is true in every year, even interpandemically. That is very, very conservative. However, talking about fatalities is important because when you say that, people say, wow, what do you mean? People die because of influenza? And that was a necessary step to take. And then, of course, a couple of days later, you had the first H1N1 death in the country, and the scene was set and it was already talked about. And then you had to pick who is going to be vaccinated first. And then, well, women and children first, whatever. I mean, risk groups, they were important. And then I misused the fact that the top football soccer clubs in Belgium inappropriately and against all agreements vaccinated they made their soccer players priority people. So I said I can use that. Because if the population really believes that this vaccine is so desirable that even the soccer players would be dishonest to get their vaccine, I said, okay, I can play with that. So I made a big fuss about this. This is Van Ranst is raving mad. But it worked.
The Chatham House organization is also funded by all major corporations of the elite, the Gates Foundation and the Open Society Foundations. We could talk for hours about the coronavirus, which has a survival rate of 99.98%, and about the incomprehensible measures that are destroying our society. Millions of entrepreneurs have lost their income. Countless elderly people have died in loneliness, isolated from their families. But I think we have reviewed enough facts that put the global COVID measures in a broader context, seen from the perspective of the elite. This extremely wealthy elite, collectively of tens of thousands of billions, has no problem whatsoever with the fact that more than 40% of the world's population has to live on less than $5.50 a day, or that millions of children are dying from the drinking water contaminated by them, or from malnutrition, or by their bullets and bombs. They just want to get more powerful. The elite have absolutely no intention to share their wealth with us. In fact, they are honest about their plans to take even the last bit from us, and those plans are being rolled out as I'm telling this.
Which again is another reason why we're doing this documentary. But as you can see, these guys own just about everything on the whole planet. That is, the elites. And shocker, these elites are working with who? Klaus Schwab. And for Klaus Schwab, and the World Economic Forum. In fact, the World Economic Forum calls them their strategic partners, in which you can just go down the line and scroll in the multitude of businesses and companies and institutions. They're all working for them. And now they have the privilege of being what's called a Davos man, and is defined as this, quote, an emerging group of economic elites who are members of a social caste which has little need for national loyalty, view national boundaries as obstacles that are thankfully vanishing, and see national governments as residues from the past whose only useful function is to facilitate the elite's global operations. In other words, they're traitors. As one man shares this, quote, Davos man fits the definition of megalomania and has acquired what he believes are sufficient financial and political resources to try to force his obsession and grand schemes on the world, and to force you, your family, and the world to comply with his vision and belief systems. I couldn't have put it better myself. That's what's going on. And one of these privileged Davos men is none other than the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink. We mentioned him earlier. As you can see here also, he admits that they have their own global agenda for the Russia-Ukraine war, and he clearly works for Klaus and the gang, as you can see here straight from the World Economic Forum's website. They're not even hiding it at all. And then we have the top financial control of the world, Vanguard, whose CEO is a man named Tim Buckley. And as you can see here also from his LinkedIn page, and shocker, he too works for Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. As you can see in this article where he states, quote, speaking of Vanguard's cooperation with the World Economic Forum, and I quote, we are proud to be in the company of other reputable organizations that share in this commitment and look forward to accelerating the path towards progress together. And folks, that progress is to own the world so that you can control the world. Why? Because, again, folks, it's obvious. He who owns the gold owns the world. They know it, and that's why they're doing it, okay? And if you're wondering how they keep track and monitor and even grow this financial wealth and power over the whole planet, believe it or not, once again, they're doing it by creating an AI or artificial intelligence run system that will and does manage the whole global financial enterprise for them all at once. In fact, they even have a name for it. It's called Aladdin. Watch this.
What if I told you there is a robot that controls more wealth than any country on earth? A robot so powerful that in the last 10 years, it has quietly created the biggest company in the world. This is the story of a robot called Aladdin. It's Wall Street's best kept secret, and it's gobbling up every asset class across every industry. Aladdin now controls $21 trillion of our global economy. To put that in perspective, that's more than the $20 trillion GDP of the US or the $15 trillion GDP of the entire European Union. The New Statesman wrote, the total physical cash of all 7 billion people and every company, bank vault, wallet, and piggy bank in the world is around $5 trillion. Aladdin has grown into a system responsible for more than 4 times the value of all the money in the world. This one robot directs the actions of the US Federal Reserve, almost every major bank and investment fund on Wall Street, and over 17,000 traders. It controls half of all ETFs, 17% of the bond market, 10% of the global stock market, and carries out 250,000 trades every day and billions of forecasts every week. Year after year, it hoovers up trillions of data points on every market, every company, every asset, and now even each of us, what we buy, sell, and say, so that it knows what to buy and what to sell far better than any human being. Every major bank, company, and investment fund has come to rely on Aladdin and its all-powerful AI and algorithms to beat the market. And if they didn't, they've collapsed and failed in Aladdin's wake. And you know what the craziest part of this story is? This robot is just getting started. So where did Aladdin come from and how did it get so powerful? Aladdin is the brainchild of Larry Fink, the founder of BlackRock, and its total dominance has made his company the biggest shadow bank in the world and the most powerful company on earth. The story you're about to hear is equally unbelievable and terrifying. In fact, you would think it was science fiction if it wasn't very real and happening today. This story starts in the 1980s when Larry Fink was making millions pioneering mortgage-backed securities at Wall Street Bank First Boston. That's right, the same mortgage-backed securities that caused the 2008 global financial crisis 20 years later. But back in the 80s, he was in an epic Wall Street rivalry with Louis Ranieri at Salomon Brothers. Back then, Larry was making millions for the bank and was on track to be First Boston's CEO. And then in 1986, an error in the back-office computer models led to Larry making the wrong trades and he lost the company $100 million. The result was Larry leaving the bank as a failure with a stupid computer to blame. With that experience, Larry had just one ambition: to build a super smart robot that could pick out risk and opportunity in the market and do it better than any computer or human could do. In 1988, he launched a new startup, BlackRock, with a tiny coding team to give birth to this robot. Its name, Aladdin, which stands for Asset, Liability, and Debt Derivative Investment Network. In its first 10 years, Aladdin was fed information about every asset, price movement, and risk variable in the global bond market, Larry's specialty. And in 1999, when Aladdin turned 11, Aladdin was getting so intelligent at picking losers and winners that Larry began selling access to its data to other Wall Street firms. That same year, he took BlackRock public on the New York Stock Exchange. Straight after the IPO, the dot-com bust burst, pushing a wall of money from the stock market to bonds, which Aladdin had become the undisputed world champion in. Within years, BlackRock had become $1 trillion company, and as money started shifting back to shares, what did Larry do? He bought the asset management arm of Merrill Lynch, which was focused to shares. So the gift for Aladdin's 18th birthday, all the data points for the entire stock market, and suddenly Aladdin had a new playground, analyzing every stock trade and risk factor for every company on the stock market. As a result, today BlackRock, together with his 2 closest rivals, Vanguard and State Street, both of which also rely on Aladdin's mountain of knowledge, have become the biggest shareholders of over 40% of all public listed companies in America. 2008, the global financial crisis hits, and before Aladdin turns 21 years old, is called on by every Wall Street bank and Timothy Geithner, the head of the Federal Reserve and the US Treasury. As soon as Lehman Brothers collapsed and the Wall Street meltdown began, the US government came calling to save the next collapsing bank, Bear Stearns. It was Aladdin who decided which assets to keep and which to leave in the $30 billion rescue package. And few people know it was a robot that saved America from disaster. With that first success, the Fed, US government, and now even European and Japanese central banks began relying on Aladdin to make the calls on where the $2.5 trillion of new money they printed should go. The majority of it, bonds and funding to prop up the mortgage companies and banks. But wait, aren't these exactly the assets that Aladdin and BlackRock already were invested in? Exactly. But growing protests of conflict of interest were drowned out by the noise of the printing presses printing more money, as the assets controlled by Aladdin rapidly grew to $11 trillion by 2013. In the last decade, Aladdin has gone from the leader to the dominator of all financial markets. With BlackRock's Barclays acquisition, it got iShares, Barclays Exchange Traded Funds Units, or ETFs. And with that, Aladdin moved from dominator of bonds and equities to dominator of ETFs, just as all the biggest investors shifted from mutual funds to ETFs. And that's when, in 2017, everything changed. On Aladdin's 29th birthday, Larry launched a top-secret project at BlackRock, codenamed Monarch. It led to the firing of his fund managers and replacing their funds with Aladdin's funds. The robot was now eliminating humans from the equation altogether. And as a result, today over 70% of all trades on US stock markets are decided by robots, with Aladdin leading the way. These trades are completed from beginning to end without a human involved, in high-frequency trading far faster than a human can execute. Now, if this was just a story about a robot taking over the job of Wall Street traders, you might not be so concerned, unless you're one of those traders. But in the last 3 years, as Aladdin hit $20 trillion in assets, incredibly, it has begun to consume and control at an even faster rate. First, in 2020, as Aladdin turned 32 years old, the US government and Federal Reserve again came calling as the pandemic hit. Aladdin was again the one to guide the nation in what was now $4 trillion of newly printed money. Where did the money go this time? Inexplicably, for the first time, the Fed began buying ETFs in 2020. Well, that's a little strange. And again, the cries of conflict of interest were drowned out by the money printing. And then Aladdin revealed its endgame. Recently, BlackRock acquired eFront, which collects data on the things that you and I own, including private equity and real estate. And since then, Aladdin has consumed eFront's data on the entire global real estate market. And yep, you guess what happened next. Over the last 2 years, BlackRock and other funds using Aladdin's data have begun buying up single-family homes, where they can afford to outbid the rest of us as they have unlimited financing at hyper-low interest rates. The result is home prices rising by 20% over the last 2 years and pushing now even big players like Zillow out of the market. And here we see Aladdin's endgame, to be the one hyper-intelligent AI robot that not just controls Wall Street assets, but all assets, public and private. Now, I'm not into conspiracy theories, but even a skeptic with eyes wide open can see the signs. We're already at a point where no one can compete without Aladdin. As CEOs and asset managers like Anthony Malloy are now saying, Aladdin is like oxygen. Without it, we wouldn't be able to function. And what about government regulation? Well, Joe Biden has appointed BlackRock executive Brian Deese as head of the National Economic Council, which basically means the oversight of Aladdin and BlackRock is now the responsibility of BlackRock. And Biden has also appointed BlackRock Chief of Staff, Wally Adeyemo, to be Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, which means BlackRock is now the Treasury as well as the Treasury Advisor. And this story is far from over. The genie is out of the bottle. And Aladdin has already reached a tipping point where one robot controls more wealth than any person or country. But as Aladdin's AI capabilities continue to grow, and with its rate of control rising by another $1 trillion to $2 trillion in new assets every year, it looks inevitable that Wall Street's secret weapon could end up owning everything, and we end up owning nothing.
Gee, where have I heard that before? And you wondered how they were going to pull it off? AI. That's all tied back to Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. Anybody starting to see a pattern here? And again, this is why we encourage you, please, 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 get our massive in-depth study on AI or artificial intelligence. It's called The AI Invasion. And again, we expose all this in great detail, how these same global elites are using AI to control not just the finances of the whole planet, but just about everything else you can think of on the whole planet, including every aspect of our daily lives. Finances are just the beginning. And by the way, it's not coming, AI, this invasion, it's already being put into play by these same global elites working for Schwab and the evil gang who need AI to help them to micromanage the planet and usher in what they call the Great Reset or the Fourth Industrial Revolution, okay? But that's still not all. The third way that Klaus Schwab has pulled off this sick, twisted, satanic dystopian nightmare for all of our futures, whether we want it or not, is he also grabbed control of the world health. Not just the leaders, not just the finances, but now the world health. And this one adds even more leverage to just having total control of the leaders and finances around the whole planet. And that's because if you think about it, people not only need money to live, they also need what? You need health care to live, let alone to stay alive, especially in a time of crisis or emergency, right? And if there's one thing the Bible is clear about, folks, there's going to be a whole lot of need for health care in the 7-year tribulation when the Antichrist launches his sick, evil, murderous, satanic kingdom. And I quote Revelation 6, 1 through 14. Then I watched as the Lamb opened the first of 7 seals. And then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And then there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. And then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for a day's wages, 3 quarts of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine." Well, when the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the 4th living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given a power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and the wild beasts of the earth. And when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then to each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been was completed. And I watched as he opened the 6th seal. Listen, there was a great earthquake, and the sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The sky receded like a scroll rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Now, how many guys would say, after all those events, there's going to be a whole lot of people on the planet who are going to need some serious medical care? At least those that survive, however few that might be. Maybe it's just me, but I think a global war, a global famine, a global plague, you got wild beasts shredding people apart, not to mention a global slaughter with a global earthquake so big that every mountain and island was shaken. I think that all gives it away. Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, and don't forget the asteroid slamming into the earth. Okay, but that was just the first half of the 7-year tribulation when the Antichrist takes control and ushers in his so-called kingdom. Whereas you saw nearly, to today's standards, population, nearly 2 billion people will die in one fell swoop. It's not a good time, and obviously, you definitely don't want to be there. But here's the point. For those that remain, what are they going to need? They're going to need some serious medical care all across the planet, aren't they? So again, whoever controls the medical community on the whole planet at this time has got some serious leverage over the people of the planet, right? Okay, but now let's move on to the second half of the Antichrist reign. How does that turn out? Well, let's take a look. I'll read it to you. Revelation chapter 8, 1 through 13 says this. When he opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about a half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. The smoke of the incense together with the prayer of the saints went up before God from the angel's hand, and then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it to the earth, and there came peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes, and lightning, and an earthquake. Then the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to sound them. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down upon the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The second angel sounded his trumpet. Something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died. A third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of the water. The name of the star is Wormwood. And a third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. As I watched, I heard an eagle that was flying in midair call out in a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the trumpet blast about to be sounded by the other 3 angels." In other words, you ain't seen nothing yet. But again, how many guys would say, a third of the earth being burned up, a massive asteroid the size of a mountain slamming into the planet, a comet flying by, poisoning the water supply in the whole world, and other celestial events disrupting the whole planet will not only be a seriously bad time and one that you would seriously want to avoid by getting saved right now through Jesus Christ. If you're not, hello. But I think it's common sense that if you're not saved, please, if that's you, please get saved now. But again, here's the point. Unfortunately, for those who are left behind in this time frame, by rejecting Jesus Christ, their Lord and Savior today, after those events, what's the point? Obviously, they're going to need some serious medical needs to be taken care of, right? Again, at least for those that survive. I mean, can you imagine trying to be the ultimate survivor for those who've rejected Jesus as Savior today? And you could just whip out your first aid kits and all your wildlife classes and, hey, I learned how to apply a tourniquet. Or, excuse, what? Let's be honest. After all these events, on that kind of level, on that scale, even your homemade survival healthcare remedies, all this, it ain't going to help you much. So again, whoever does survive these events in the 7-year tribulation in the second half, you're going to need some serious global medical attention, right? So again, here's the point. Whoever controls the global healthcare system at this time has some serious leverage over the people of the planet, right? But that's still not all. Let me give you one more. You got one more round of judgments to come in the last part of the 7-year tribulation. Let's see how that goes. And I'll read it to you. This is Revelation 16, 1 through 21. Then I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the 7 angels, go, pour out the 7 bowls of God's wrath on the earth. So the first angel went out and poured out his bowl on the land, and ugly and painful sores broke out on the people who had the mark of the beast and worshiped his image. The second angel poured out his bowl on the sea, and it turned into blood like that of a dead man, and every living thing in the sea died. The third angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and the springs of water, and they became blood. Then I heard the angel in charge of the water say, you are just in these judgments, you who are and who were the Holy One, because you have so judged, for they have shed the blood of your saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink as they deserve. And I heard the altar respond, yes, Lord God Almighty, true and just are your judgments. Then the fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and the sun was given power to scorch people with fire, and they were seared with intense heat, and they cursed the name of God, who had control over these plagues. But they refused to repent and glorify him. The fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and his kingdom was plunged into darkness. Men gnawed their tongues in agony and cursed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, but they refused to repent of what they had done. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings of the east. And then I saw 3 evil spirits that looked like frogs. They came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. These are the spirits of demons performing miraculous signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty. Behold, I come like a thief. Blessed is he who stays awake and keeps his clothes with him, so that he may not go naked and be shamefully exposed. Then they gathered the kings together to the place in Hebrew is called Armageddon. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne saying, it is done. Then there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a severe earthquake. Listen, no earthquake like it has ever occurred since man has been on earth. So tremendous was the quake. The great city split into 3 parts. The cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. Every island fled away, and the mountains could not be found. And from the sky, huge hailstones of about 100 pounds each fell upon men, and they cursed God on account of the plague of hail, because the plague was so terrible. Wow. Now again, how many guys would say, after all those events, this time now at the end of the 7-year tribulation, there's going to be a whole lot of people on the planet who are going to need some serious medical care, right? I think you're starting to see the pattern here. People, I'm telling you, this is obvious. People breaking out with obvious, huge, painful sores all over their bodies because they took the mark. Every living thing in the sea dies. There's no fresh water supply left whatsoever this time now on the planet. The sun is now scorching people with fire and intense heat. People are gnawing at their tongues. There's this giant battle of Armageddon that occurs, but they lose obviously big time. God never loses. There's an earthquake so big that it not only shakes the whole planet, but every island and every mountain fled away. Every city collapsed. Now again, maybe it's just me, but I'm kind of thinking that's not only a time you want to avoid by receiving Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior right now, but for those who are left behind because you didn't receive Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior today, they're going to need what? You're going to need some major, serious medical care across the whole planet. So again, here's the point. Whoever controls the medical community on the whole planet at this time has some serious leverage over the people of the planet. And you tell me, folks, you don't think the Antichrist won't do this? Of course he will. All right? As much as he lusts for power, put yourself in his shoes. If you're the Antichrist and your goal is to micromanage the whole planet, as Revelation 13 says he will, then you're going to need some serious leverage over the whole planet. Okay? Think about it. Controlling politicians and finances, that's definitely part of it. Okay, where he's going to use that to control and force people to do whatever he wants them to do, including worship him, the actual Antichrist, as if he were a god, and taking his mark into the body so they can continue to buy and sell and not be shut out of the global economic system. Okay, but financial control, okay, and political control can only take you so far. So how are you going to force even the resistors to your global tyranny into going along with this as well? And I say that because the Bible is clear. Not everybody is going to go along and worship the Antichrist as God. Certainly not the Jewish people. I think that's common sense, all right? So the question is then, how do you force, how do you order, how do you make and cause, as Revelation 13 says he will, the bulk of the planet to bow a knee to the Antichrist and accept this mark? Simple. You got leverage. You build a global system that not only controls the politicians and the finances, but also controls the whole medical community so that when these disasters hit and when people are injured on a massive scale, and they will be, you use that as leverage to get them to bow down and obey you, because now it's a matter of life and death. I mean, think about it. You want those burns to be treated from that global fire? You better take this chip. You want those broken bones set from that giant tsunami that slammed into the coastline? Bow a knee. You want your body healed from drinking all that poisonous water that's killing you from the inside and out? Hey, no problem. Just worship the Antichrist. Total global control and total global domination by controlling all the politicians and the finances and the medical community and using that as leverage. And so guess what? That's not just a theory. Believe it or not, folks, this same thing by Klaus Schwab, they're already doing it with the help of AI. These same global elites working for Schwab and the World Economic Forum not only have AI, Aladdin, running the whole show for the global finances, but they also have AI controlling the whole medical community. Where, listen, right now, AI is already replacing doctors, replacing surgeries, predicting diseases, replacing medical administration, controlling your diet, controlling your drugs, controlling your death, determining your mental state, determining your age, determining the day you die. It sounds crazy, folks, but it's all happening right now, already being put in place around the world by these global elites and the World Economic Forum, and it's a major sign that the 7-year tribulation has got to be getting close. And so again, if you're not saved, please, you better get saved now. This is not a joke. But again, this is why, folks, I'm telling you, we encourage you to get our in-depth study on AI, or artificial intelligence. There's nothing like it out there. It's called the AI Invasion. And you will clearly see in great detail, like these documentaries, that these same global elites are using AI to not just control the whole financial system, they're using it right now to control the global healthcare system and every aspect of our lives. It's all part of enabling them to micromanage the planet, just like Revelation 13 says. So please, again, I encourage you, check that study out. But these same elites who have been already building this AI-controlled global medical system also already have a global entity who governs the whole global medical process. In fact, it's been in existence for quite some time now. You may have heard of it. It's called the World Health Organization. And shocker, guess what? They too work for Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. Anybody starting to see a pattern here? But let's take a look at that.
The World Health Organization is a specialized agency of the United Nations responsible for international public health. It is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, with 6 semi-autonomous regional offices and 150 field offices worldwide. The WHO was established in the 7th of April 1948, which is commemorated as World Health Day. The WHO's broad mandate includes advocating for universal health care, monitoring public health risks, coordinating responses to health emergencies, and promoting human health and well-being. It provides technical assistance to countries, sets international health standards and guidelines, and collects data on global health issues through the World Health Survey. Its flagship publication, the World Health Report, provides expert assessments of global health topics and health statistics on all nations. The WHO also serves as a forum for summits and discussions on health issues. The WHO has played a leading role in several public health achievements, most notably the eradication of smallpox, the near eradication of polio, and the development of an Ebola vaccine. Its current priorities include communicable diseases, particularly HIV, AIDS, Ebola, malaria and tuberculosis, non-communicable diseases such as heart disease and cancer, healthy diet, nutrition, and food security and substance abuse. The World Health Assembly, composed of representatives from all 194 member states, serves as the agency's supreme decision-making body. It also elects and advises an executive board made up of 34 health specialists. The WA convenes annually and is responsible for selecting the Director General, setting goals and priorities, and approving the WHO's budget and activities. The current Director General is Tedros Adhanom, former Health Minister and Foreign Minister of Ethiopia, who began his 5-year term on 1 July 2017. The WHO relies on assessed and voluntary contributions from member states and private donors for funding. As of 2018, it has a budget of over $4.2 billion, most of which comes from voluntary contributions from member states. The International Sanitary Conferences, originally held on 23 June 1851, were the first predecessors of the WHO. A series of 14 conferences that lasted from 1851 to 1938, the International Sanitary Conferences worked to combat many diseases as cholera, yellow fever, and the bubonic plague. The conferences were largely ineffective until the 7th, in 1892, when an international sanitary convention that dealt with cholera was passed. In part as a result of the successes of the conferences, the Pan-American Sanitary Bureau, and the Office International de Hygiene Publique were soon founded. When the League of Nations was formed in 1920, they established the Health Organization of the League of Nations. After World War II, the United Nations absorbed all the other health organizations, to form the World Health Organization. During the 1945 United Nations Conference on International Organization, Ximingzi, a delegate from the Republic of China, conferred with Norwegian and Brazilian delegates on creating an international health organization under the auspices of the new United Nations. The use of the word world, rather than international, emphasized the truly global nature of what the organization was seeking to achieve. The Constitution of the World Health Organization was signed by all 51 countries of the United Nations, and by 10 other countries, on the 22nd of July 1946. TS first priorities were to control the spread of malaria, tuberculosis and sexually transmitted infections, and to improve maternal and child health, nutrition and environmental hygiene. The WHO's constitution states that its objective is the attainment by all people of the highest possible level of health.
Who can help the sick? Who can warn people about dangers to their health? Who can stop a deadly virus from turning us all into brain-eating zombies?
Oh wait, no, not that one. That's just in the movies. But everything else, well,
who can? No, I mean, who can? Like WHO, who? There we go. The World Health Organization.
It was officially founded back in 1948, not long after the Second World War, as part of another big international organisation tasked with saving the world, the United Nations. The UN decided that along with things like keeping peace and security around the globe, there was another important thing to take care of to ensure the survival of the human race: our health.
The struggle against epidemics is a global one, for the danger of death is worldwide.
You see, long before the UN and the WHO existed, the world had tackled some pretty big outbreaks. The worst in history was the bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death. That's about as horrible as it sounds. In fact, in the 1300s, it wiped out up to 200 million people, or 60% of Europe's population. Yikes. Centuries later, there were diseases like yellow fever, cholera, smallpox, and the Spanish flu, which at the end of World War I infected about 1/3 of the planet's population. A disease that spreads that far around the globe is known as a pandemic. The WHO's aim was to stop that sort of thing from happening again.
The World Health Organization will make full use of every existing means: education, prevention, cure. All peoples of every race and belief will be helped by doctors from all races and nations.
Since it started, the WHO has done some pretty amazing things, like helping to totally wipe out the deadly virus smallpox through vaccinations. It's also leading the fight against contagious diseases like HIV/AIDS, Ebola, malaria, and tuberculosis. And it helps to educate people on sometimes less obvious dangers to their health, like consuming too much sugar or playing video games for way too long. But to many, it's still good to know that there's a big, powerful group out there fighting for our health.
Fighting for our health or controlling our health? Did you see how it went way beyond just supposedly eradicating diseases through vaccines, but also telling you what you eat? Like if you've had too much sugar or fast food, or even if you played too many video games? What's up with that? I mean, the next thing you know, they'll tell us to stop eating meat, which is precisely a part of the plan, as we will soon see. But hey, don't worry. Even though the World Health Organization was launched around the same time and under the same agenda of the United Nations that also controls and governs the nations around the world, dictating what they can and cannot do, I'm sure that the World Health Organization isn't going to do the same thing with our health. That is, govern or take control of the health of the whole planet and what people can and cannot do or eat or ingest or whatever. Yeah, right. If you believe that, you've been listening to the propaganda commercials for way too long. Like this one that tries to get us to believe that they're just here to help. Watch this.
The COVID-19 pandemic is one of the biggest challenges we are facing. It's been a stark and painful reminder that nobody is safe until everyone is safe. There will be other pandemics and other major health emergencies. No single government or multilateral agency can address this threat alone. Together, we must be better prepared to predict, prevent, detect, assess, and effectively respond to pandemics in a highly coordinated fashion. The 194 member states of the World Health Organization resolved to work together towards a new international instrument for pandemic preparedness and response. This renewed collective commitment is a milestone in stepping up pandemic preparedness at the highest political level. Such an agreement, rooted in the World Health Organization Constitution, could strengthen existing international health instruments, especially the international health regulations, and provide a firm and tested foundation on which we can build and improve. The agreement also has the potential to foster an all-of-government and all-of-society approach, strengthening national, regional, and global capacities and resilience to future pandemics. This could include greatly enhancing international cooperation to improve alert systems, data sharing, research, and local, regional, and global production and distribution of medical public health countermeasures such as vaccines, diagnostics, and personal protective equipment. The agreement could also recognize the One Health approach that connects the health of humans, animals, and our planet. To achieve this, WHO will support its member states in their work and facilitate the involvement of relevant stakeholders, including from civil society and the private sector. Pandemic preparedness needs global leadership for a global health system fit for this millennium. To make this commitment a reality, we must be guided by solidarity, fairness, transparency, inclusiveness, and equity.
Yeah, shut it off, will you? But see, they're here to help us as that video shares. We must let them guide us, the whole planet, into doing what is best for our health. I mean, do you want to suffer another pandemic like we had on our hands with COVID-19? Yeah, right. It was a plandemic all along with the World Health Organization's involvement to help facilitate their total global takeover and power grab of the whole world, including people's health. And for even more proof of that, all you got to do is look at their leaders throughout their history, as well as their current director. The current director of the World Health Organization is a guy named Tedros Ghebreyesus, however you pronounce that, by the way, from Ethiopia, who clearly got his start, wait for it, that's right, quote, former American President Bill Clinton and the Clinton Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, okay? That tells you exactly who he's working for, which goes right back to Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, because that's who the Clintons and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are working for, okay? But for even more proof that the World Health Organization does not have our best health interests at heart, pun intended by the way, but they really are being used to control all people's health across the whole planet, just like the United Nations was used and created to control all the governments on the planet. Let's now take a look at that treaty they were proposing and promoting in that video. They say the whole planet, all of us, we need to sign on to a whole new international treaty that would give them, the World Health Organization, even more power over all of us. In fact, that's exactly what it is. When you look at this actual treaty proposed by the World Health Organization, it's clearly the beginning of the end of all individual health autonomy and even national autonomy around the whole planet. Okay, it will allow them to do such things, and I quote, the World Health Organization would reserve the right to decide what constitutes a pandemic and have already changed the definition of the term. It could be the flu, so anything can be used. Number two, the treaty gives the World Health Organization the power to name the new disease and decide what quarantine measures are needed on a global scale. Number three, they would also have control over who gets to develop the new treatments and decide whether they're safe. Number four, they would be given the authority to determine who gets quarantine, i.e. lockdown. Number five, they would decide, listen, over vaccine mandates for each country, which means, put it all together, it will form an even stronger one world government that will allow the World Health Organization to establish a truly one world health system, which is why people are saying, quote, the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty spells the end for democracy. And it only takes, folks, listen, 2/3 of the nations to agree to ram this treaty right down our throats while placing sanctions on dissenting countries. In other words, you get punished if you don't go along. In fact, this latest WHO treaty would allow the World Health Organization Constitution to also supersede national constitutions, including our own here in America. And I'm not the only one, folks, blowing the whistle on this massive, sneaky power grab. So are a lot of other people, as you can see here.
So we want to open this evening with a story you may not have heard, but that you should definitely know about. It begins early last year when Joe Biden, as one of his very first acts as president, brought the United States back into the World Health Organization. We saw this, we thought, why would Biden be so anxious to do something like that? At the time, we assumed it was just part of his larger de-orangification effort. Trump had pulled the U.S. out of the World Health Organization, so Biden had to do the opposite. Childish, but that seemed like a fair explanation. Still, it did seem a little weird because there aren't many international bodies that are more thoroughly discredited than the World Health Organization, particularly after COVID. It's a laughingstock. There's one thing it's not good at, it's public health. Since the very first cases of the coronavirus were reported in Wuhan, the WHO slavishly ran interference for the Chinese government and did it in the most cartoonish and obvious way. First, WHO claimed there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission of the virus. Remember this? They cited Chinese officials who were obviously lying, and we now know they were lying. Then, when it became clear the virus probably came out of a Chinese government lab, WHO sabotaged the investigation into the origin of the virus by appointing a gain-of-function researcher to lead the investigative team. Pretty shocking if you think about it. And to this day, the WHO still has not acknowledged it did any of that, though it definitely did. Instead, they've continued to praise China's response to COVID as, quote, transparent, which is the one thing it's not. It's almost amusing. But again, it's weird if you think about it. Why would Joe Biden want to join a group that every informed person laughs at? Well, more than a year later, we think we know the answer. The Biden administration is very close to handing the World Health Organization power over every aspect, the intimate aspects of your life. So imagine the civil liberties abuses that you lived through during the COVID lockdowns, but permanent and administered from a foreign country. Here's what we're looking at tonight. This January, the Biden administration submitted a series of proposed amendments to something called the International Health Regulations, the IHR. Now, the Biden administration's amendments, along with those from several other countries, will be combined to create a new global pandemic treaty. We need a pandemic treaty. That treaty is set to be adopted starting this weekend in Geneva at the World Health Assembly. Now, the full text of the treaty is not yet finished, but a WHO working group has summarized what it's going to look like. The document begins by promising to restrict the WHO's authority just to pandemics. Calm down, it's just pandemics. Quote, WHO Secretariat to play the leading, convening, and coordinating role in operational aspects of emergency response to a pandemic, end quote. So don't get paranoid. Someone needs to coordinate the pandemic response globally because it's a global problem. Got it? Settle down, conspiracy nut. But here's the catch. The World Health Organization gets to define what a pandemic is, when a pandemic is in progress, and how long a pandemic lasts. Then you read the fine print and you realize the WHO will have total authority over emergency operations in the United States if there is ever a, quote, public health emergency. Huh? What qualifies exactly as a public health emergency? Well, they don't define that. But they get to decide what a public health emergency is. And then they have total authority. You can see where this is going. Now, the Biden administration has made certain that unelected bureaucrats at the WHO have total authority to declare and define public health emergencies. They did it explicitly. The White House eliminated a provision that would have required the World Health Organization to, quote, consult with and attempt to obtain verification from the state party in whose territory the event is allegedly occurring in. So, as originally written, they couldn't do anything without the permission of their member countries' governments. But thanks to the change that the Biden administration pushed, effectively there is no limit at all on WHO's power. And then it gets worse from there. The treaty also mandates a, quote, whole of government and whole of society approach to pandemic preparedness. Think about that. Every society is always preparing for a pandemic, and that means there will not be a moment ever when the WHO doesn't have operational control over so-called public health matters in this country. Now, what's that going to mean exactly? You've already guessed it's not really about public health. It never is. But before we tell you what exactly it's going to mean, you should know that none of this is going to be optional. Thanks to an amendment from the Biden administration, the treaty contains a provision for a compliance committee. Ooh, there's always the stick. It provides that every member country in the WHO must, quote, inform WHO about the establishment of its national competent authority responsible for overall implementation of the IHR that will be recognized and held accountable. Under this treaty, WHO members must enforce orders from the WHO. They have to act as the heavies for the WHO, and if they don't, they'll be sanctioned. The White House is going to be the muscle for the director of the World Health Organization. So who is the director of the World Health Organization? Well, that would be a former member of Ethiopia's Marxist-Leninist party called Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. He once led the Ministry of Health in Ethiopia. He's not a physician. But as the head of the Ministry of Health in Ethiopia, for political reasons, he covered up 3 cholera outbreaks, the opposite of what he's supposed to do. He wrote off cholera as simply acute watery diarrhea. Again, he's not a doctor, so maybe he didn't know, but he did know.
So you shouldn't be surprised if you haven't heard about this, because almost no one has heard about it, because the Biden administration has deliberately tried to keep it as secret as possible, and the mainstream media is not covering it. So thank you so much for covering this. So what happened basically is that the Department of Health and Human Services of the Biden administration submitted a set of so-called amendments to a 2005 treaty, which are, if passed, and it looks like they're going to pass unless we take some action immediately. If they are passed, it will seriously undermine and damage the sovereignty of the United States. So, what these amendments do is they are an amendment to a 2005 treaty where everything was voluntary. They make a lot of the stuff that was voluntary mandatory. And one of the things that it does, for example, there's a provision that is within the 2005 treaty that is stricken from the amendments that requires the WHO to have the consent of the country where the health event is happening in order for the WHO to take action. So just with that one striking of that, it means the WHO, and it's really the Director General of the WHO, which is Tedros, will have the ability to come into a country and take action on a so-called health event without the consent of the country. They don't define a health event. So it could be anything. It's anything that affects public health. Okay? Could be a pandemic. Could be gun violence. Could be climate change. Could be mental health. Could be anything that they want to say is a health event. So basically, they can do anything that they want and just come into the United States and effectuate their will. They've established something called a compliance committee, which is appointed. Who's going to appoint them? Tedros? Do we trust people that Tedros is going to be appointing? And by the way, whoever gave the World Health Organization the authority to do this, they are not an elected body. They are just an administrative body. They're supposed to be advisory, helping governments. They're not supposed to be dictatorial over governments. WHO is an arm of the United Nations. We do not want the United Nations dictating our health care in the United States. And they are deeply in bed with China. The United Nations is, the WHO is. We saw this in the way that they handled the pandemic, particularly in the beginning, where the WHO went along with China's lies that there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission. And also they opposed Trump's decision to stop international travel from China, saying it was racist. So what that did is it enabled the virus to be spread all over the world. The WHO just worked hand in hand with the Chinese Communist Party to cover up their malfeasance, and the result is that millions of people died. Why should they be entrusted with international health care? So the Biden administration tried to hide it. Somebody found it, and so now people are trying to raise awareness, but it's almost too late. It's like it's like the horse has left. You can't bring it back. I had mentioned there's a compliance committee that is going to be appointed, no doubt by Tedros, and they're going to have the power to monitor compliance within a nation and to facilitate compliance. Okay, so how are they going to monitor? How are they going to monitor our efforts if it's not through something like a vaccine passport, smart health card, digital ID? What this is going to do is it's going to give the World Health Organization the ability to surveil all of us in a way that's going to be very similar to the vaccine passport, which is the same platform as the China social credit system. Everything can be attached to this. It's a tool of totalitarian control and mass surveillance. And then they can facilitate compliance. So let's say the WHO says, you need to vaccinate everybody, you need to lock everybody down, anyone who's not vaccinated needs to be quarantined, or how about this, everyone who's not vaccinated is suffering from some kind of a mental illness, right? I mean, they could say people who question election integrity, who think maybe that there was some form of election fraud in the 2020 election.
Yeah, they're psychotic.
They're psychotic. I mean, there was already a bulletin from, it was from the, let's see, it's from the National, it's right here, the National Terrorism Advisory System. National Terrorism Advisory System that said that people who think that there was election fraud or who take issue with the COVID narrative are domestic terrorists. Wow. So these things are working together: the domestic terrorism thing and this WHO power grab to really impose globalism on the United States and the world.
Anyone remember voting for the World Health Organization to take control of our lives? No? Me neither. And yet here we are, teetering on the brink of joining most of the countries of the world in surrendering our national sovereignty under the terms of a proposed new pandemic treaty. Once British ink is dry on the necessary paperwork, we and most of the rest of the billions living on planet Earth will, in the event of another pandemic, take our instructions not from politicians we actually voted for and could, hypothetically at least, have the option of getting rid of, but from the unelected, faceless bureaucrats of the WHO. This is no conspiracy theory, by the way, no tin hats required. This is real and happening now. And a whole lot of people would rather you weren't paying attention. The WHO is a fabulously wealthy offshoot of the United Nations. It has its head office in Geneva and is presently headed by Ethiopian-born Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. Know much about him? No, nor me. He and it are funded by 194 member states and also by donations from private entities. As things stand, most of its money comes from the United States of America, from communist China, and from computer salesman and international man of mystery Bill Gates. Let us remember that for the past 2 years, the WHO has loudly celebrated the approach taken by China to the handling of COVID-19. Even now, as tens or perhaps hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens remain locked in their homes in scores of cities across that country, and after unknown numbers have died in those circumstances, including some who committed suicide by leaping to their deaths from their tower block imprisonment, the WHO continues to applaud the tactics of the Chinese Communist Party that is its benefactor. For his own part, Bill Gates, who struggles even to control viruses in the software sold by Microsoft, is on record admiring the draconian approach taken by Australia, to the extent that he has said that, in his opinion, the world would have had greater success in eliminating the disease, the one that more than likely leaked from a lab in China, if only more nations had followed the Australian model, locked everyone down and sought zero COVID. Now we in Great Britain, without so much as a by your leave from our leaders, and along with around 95% of the world's population, must contemplate a future in which decisions about what we will be ordered to do in the face of another pandemic will be taken by the unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats of the Chinese Communist Party worshipping WHO under the unseemly influence of a tech billionaire with no more qualifications in the fields of medicine and disease control than I have. It's worth remembering that President Donald Trump insisted on divorce from the WHO on the grounds that it was too close to China, only for President Biden to remarry them again in 2021. All of that is history, however. In a matter of days, the World Health Assembly will meet in Geneva for a vote on the treaty. The target date for final ratification is in May 2024, but by then the power grab will have long been completed. Amendments written into the proposed treaty by the re-enamoured Biden administration will see 194 nations cede sovereignty over national health care decisions to the WHO. The WHO would thereby have decision-making power over and above our own government and every other government. Consider this. When you watch footage of the 26 million people of Shanghai locked down in their homes, their cats and dogs beaten to death in the street, the WHO would, by the terms of the new treaty, have the power to impose the same on cities here. Note too that under the terms of the treaty, the WHO does not have to show any data to legitimise its conclusions or decisions. It's also worth knowing, to say the least, that it would be up to the WHO to define what the next pandemic is. Seeing how things are going, I would hardly be surprised to hear about a pandemic of obesity or of heart attacks, followed by the lockdowns and other restrictions to deal with same. No doubt lockdowns to fix the climate can't be far away either. In the case of climate, the WHO might draw the conclusion that we, the human species, are the virus. Who knows what they might conclude and decide then? Be in no doubt, this so-called pandemic treaty is the single greatest global power grab that any of us has seen in our lifetime. It's nothing less than the groundwork, the laying of deep foundations for global governance through the WHO. Many of those opposed to the treaty, and there is an online petition here in the UK seeking to demand that the matter be discussed in Parliament, have pointed to the, shall we say, compromised position of the WHO itself. Much has been made of the notion that a fish rots from the head. Back in 2017, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe was appointed as a goodwill ambassador of the WHO by Tedros. and only dropped after shrieks of outrage from those who pointed out that Mugabe might have been a controversial choice of poster boy for an organisation notionally committed to the well-being of living people. A glance at the 34-member executive board of the WHO reveals seats occupied by such human rights luminaries as Syria and East Timor, among others. And remember all the time the links the WHO has with communist China, a state with more human rights abuses under its belt than any decent human being might want to contemplate. And that's before we get to the looming presence of the world's fourth, or is it second, richest man, the one and only Bill Gates and his foundation, whose commitment to mass vaccination is unsurpassed. As far as I'm concerned, the whole thing stinks like the aforementioned dead fish. The approach taken to COVID by the Chinese government and endorsed by the WHO was never about health, I say, and always about control. Just as there is more than one way to skin a cat, one beaten to death in a Shanghai street by a man in a hazmat suit armed with a stick, perhaps, so there is more than one way to seek to impose undemocratic authoritarian control upon a population. Just as for instance, a government desiring such control might try frightening the living daylights out of its people, telling them that if they don't take their medicine that Big Pharma knows in advance might kill or maim some of them, that they won't be able to travel, leave the country, go to work, or the pub, or the cinema, or to school. A government, or indeed any unelected body seeking total control, might tell its people that unless they do what they're told, they won't ever be getting back to anything even resembling their old normal lives. That's not how you protect people from a pandemic. That's how you exploit and manipulate the very notion of a pandemic in order to seize and retain control.
This World Health Organization pandemic treaty. Do you know what this is? This is a bid by globalists to override the laws and constitutions of every country on Earth and make them subordinate to a global COVID world order. A world order of dystopian lockdowns and masks and vax mandates and forced injections and a whole lot more. And of course, we've been talking to Australians a lot because they've been the ones sounding the alarm the most about this treaty. Probably because they now know what the COVID world order looks like because they've lived through it in Australia. Australia was supposedly a free democracy, but became as tyrannical as communist China during COVID. People couldn't leave the country or cross state lines or even leave their homes. People were ordered to download phone apps to track where they were. Police would stop people in the parks to inspect their coffee cups to make sure that they really had coffee in them and that they weren't just carrying a drink as an excuse to not cover their faces with an oxygen-restricting, bacteria-ridden Sharia face muzzle. Soldiers with submachine guns terrorized sunbathers on empty beaches. That's the COVID world order. And if globalists have their way, it'll be what we have for the entire planet.